Today I'm finally going to be getting around to taking the time to improve my Tong clamp system. For as long as I can remember, I've been working out of this coffee can and it's a real mess. Everything's just piled in there, of course, so you got to dump it all out to find what you're looking for, and half the time what you want isn't in there. So I'm going to build a system today that has a complete range of sizes that I need, and they're all going to be organized so I can find what I'm looking for, and more importantly, it's going to be really easy to just keep it organized. Hi, I'm Dennis Frechette, and welcome back. Today I'm going to be forging this series of graduated rings, and I'm going to be using these as Tong clamps. If you're not familiar with Tong clamps, they're basically a bar or a clip or some form of clamp that holds the two rings together so it leaves your hands free to work, other tools like a punch or a chisel or, that kind of a thing. Now, normally I wouldn't be bothering you with this, but today I've decided to make them a little bit differently, and this is going to provide a learning opportunity for those of you who are just starting out. And what I'm going to do is, instead of just randomly closing the link wherever it happens to wind up, I'm going to make sure that each end of the bar is winding up right in the center of the link. Of course, it doesn't make any difference where the end of the links end up. Doesn't affect the function of it at all, but it does mean that you have to adjust the link as you're forging it to make sure that the ends meet in the center. So that's going to teach you a lot about working on the horn. And so hopefully you can appreciate that, and you're going to want to work through this process. So that's what I'm demonstrating for you today, and hope you give it a try. Now, to the untrained eye, it is going to seem like I'm doing the same thing over and over again. And there is going to be a real tendency for you to fast forward to see if anything is going to be happening in this video. But I would encourage you not to, because what I'm going to try to do today is let you in on what I'm seeing and what I'm thinking about as I'm forging these rings. And hopefully that process will show you now, when it comes to hand forging, you always need to be ready to change the way you intend to do something on a moment's notice, because there are variables that come up that require creative solutions, and you need to find those solutions as quickly as possible, because you only have a few seconds to do the work that you need to do every time you take the steel out of the fire. And the only way to get better at finding those solutions is to put in the time, and that's where jobs like this can really help. Today I'm going to be forging these rings out of 1/4 inch round bar. The shortest bar that I'm going to be using is 3 3/4 inches, and the longest one is going to be 12 inches. And I'll have a whole list of these lengths at the end of the video. Here I'm working with the shortest bar, and I'm just putting a bend on the end of the bar. I don't know how far off this is going to be until I put the bend on the other end of the bar. But I know for sure that it's not going to be staying there. That's why I'm not wrapping the bar all the way around. So I'm starting with a shorter bend on this side of the bar, but right away I see that even that's not right. So I'm going to take the last little bit of the heat to straighten out that corner and move the location of that bend over a little. So here I'm getting ready to do the same thing on the other side, and you can see how I've positioned the ring on the horn. I have the bottom outside edge of the ring touching the horn, so that part is supported, and I'm going to be hammering the curved section that's sitting above the horn. So that has to move because it's not supported. So when I hammer the top edge, it's going to straighten out, and that is effectively going to start moving the curved section over. Or at least it was supposed to, but for some reason I didn't move the anchor point over far enough on the horn, so I wound up just hammering it right back where it was. Now, it's true that I didn't waste a lot of time, but if you make a habit of this sort of thing, it can really start to add up. During this time, I decided that the short leg of this ring is pretty close to where it needs to be, so I'm going to go ahead and finish curving that, and then I'll go back and fix my mistake from the other side. And you can see here by the overlap, if I hadn't have screwed up that last heat, this ring would be pretty much done by now. So So here I'm back straightening out the first bend that I made. I'm going to hammer the back as flat as I can, and then I'm going to support the curve with the underside of the horn, and that way just the end that's exposed is going to bend. So this is where I want to be. The ends of the bars still aren't touching, but I have two loops that are identical, so I know that I have to put the same bend on each end to close the loop. Here I'm refining the curve of one of the bends. I noticed that I had two different radiuses, so I've straightened it out a little bit, and I'm hammering it over the horn to create a wider radius on the bend. So here I'm back. I have two bends, they're in the right spot, and now they're both the same shape. So I'm just going to gently curve both ends of the ring until the ends of the bar meet up in the center. So here again, you can see how I'm setting this up. The bottom outside edge of the ring is supported by the horn, so that's not going to move. And I have an airspace that's above that. So when I hammer that section of the ring, that's going to move because it's not supported. And that's going to allow me to put the bend exactly where I want it. Also, with the ring in this position, I need to hammer across the horn instead of straight down. At this point, I'm happy with how the ring turned out, so I'm just going to use the last little bit of the heat to clean up the shape and close up the gap a little bit. Here I'm working on bar 2, and it's a little bit longer, so as a starting point, I'm going to put roughly the same bend that I used on the first ring. At this point, I can see that the bend still isn't in the right place, so I can show you what I should have done on that first ring. It starts off the same. You can see how I have the outside edge of the ring supported by the horn, and the airspace above the horn is what I'm going to be flattening. Here you can see how I've changed the position of the ring on the horn quite a bit. Now the whole curved section is being supported by the horn, and the overhanging end of the ring is what I'm going to be able to move because it's not being supported. Also, that part of the ring is still very hot, so it's going to want to move first before anything else anyway. So this end of the bar is closer to where it needs to be, so I'm just going to take the last bits of the heat to refine the shape a little bit. And once again, I'm going to be using the horn as a mandrel to define the shape that I need. Basically, I'm doing the same thing to this side of the bar, and once I have this done, it's just a process of gradually moving both curves until the ends meet in the center. So you just work on one side, work on the other side, basically do whatever you have to do to get the shape right and to get the ends of the bars to line up with the center line of the ring. Here I'm straightening out the back because this link is long enough that there should be a straight section along the back edge. So that's going to open up the front. That means I'm just going to tease it back into shape, maintaining the straight back of the link. Here I'm working on the third bar. I've lost the first heat somewhere, but it was basically just a bend, and you can see here how it was really in the wrong position, so I'm creating this bend quite a bit shorter to compensate for that. Also, you can see how my muscle memory is starting to kick in, and the process is getting a little bit more fluid because I don't have to reason through every problem that comes up. You'll find when you do a lot of production work that most of the process just goes on autopilot and it sits in the back of your brain somewhere, and you don't really give it much thought until you don't do it for quite a while and you have to, start thinking about the process again. So you're bringing up really old memories, and, sometimes it can take a while to get those synapses connected back up again. So it can be pretty embarrassing. So a simple job like this can really throw you off because the overall concept seems so basic, but to get it to look right and to do it efficiently, you really need a lot of careful observation and a lot of precision forging. And that can be really frustrating if you don't really have a good understanding of what you need to do to get the metal to move where you want it. Here I'm working on the fourth bar, and even though the bar is getting longer, you'll notice that I'm creating shorter and shorter loops on the ends of the bar. And that's because I'm starting to wonder if it's easier to just bend the straight bar of the ring to adjust the length rather than messing around with the curves a whole lot. So I'm going to try that on this one. Here I'm back working on the first bend that I made on this bar because I realized that that corner has to move out towards the edge. Now, regardless of how I'm using the horn, the theory behind how I'm using the horn doesn't change. I'm always supporting the work that I don't want to bend, and I leave the work that I want to bend overhanging the horn. When I'm bending, I never hammer on the horn. You can quite often use the horn to shape a curve because it just happens to have the right radius, but I'm never hammering on the horn with enough pressure to deform the piece. The horn is just for shaping, not for drawing out. There are different opinions about that, but as far as I'm concerned, I don't like using the horn for drawing out. It's a flexible part of the anvil, so if the horn is moving underneath your hammer, the bar is not moving. So the only part of the anvil that I use for forging is the face. It's a solid block sitting over top of a solid base. Here again, I'm just doing some fine tuning to get the shape right. I need to straighten out the back. That, as a result, is going to open up the seam in the front, so I've got to nudge that back together to close up that gap. And as I mentioned earlier, that's why it's so important to take on these kind of jobs. It allows you the opportunity to practice these skills on a job that has absolutely no tolerances. I mean, let's face it, you can make any kind of a ring and it'll do the job well. But if you can up your game a little bit by doing a little bit more work and research, that's really going to pay off in the long run. The last ring shaped up really well, so I'm going to try to do the same thing with this ring. So with this one, my focus is going to change a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, the muscle memory is starting to kick in, so I don't really have to think about the actual process very much. So what I want to focus on now is what I'm actually doing in each heat. And I'm trying to build a mental image library of where I should be at each step of the process. And that'll get refined as I go along. So by the end of it, I should have a really clear picture of where I need to be all along the way. And that's going to be obviously what I use to determine whether I am where I should be at every step of the process. For example, with these rings, that first bend is turning out to be a pretty crucial point. The angle and the position of that first bend allows me to see whether it's in the right place or not. So even though I've only made a couple of these rings, I can start to see how that shape is going to fall in place around the center of this ring. So that's helping me speed the process along. And that's what I like about this project. It's just fundamentals. If something's crooked, it's crooked and you see it. It's not being covered up by fancy leaves or twists or something like that. It's there and you're looking at it. And it's going to stay there looking back at you until you fix it. So at this point, I'm just going to start refining the process. My body's on full autopilot right now. I'm not really thinking about anything anymore, so I'm really taking the time to notice everything that I'm doing. And you can already see how I'm refining the process already. I'm making the initial bend a lot shorter than I did, and I'm not wrapping it around anywhere as much as I did initially, because I'm finding that that gives me the most flexibility to adjust it later on. Also, I can see where the end of the bar is going to end up in relation to the ring, so I can start making decisions a lot earlier on about where I need to bend it to get it to meet up where I want it. And this is one of the reference points that I was talking about earlier on, the angle of that bend and how much it's curved. Those are reference points that you can use to determine whether you're in the right place at this time, because now you can see how that is going to end up in the finished ring. Now for this simple project, that's pretty much the only reference point that you need, but when you start working on things that are more complicated, there might be, as many as half a dozen reference areas that you need to pay attention to make sure that the end piece works out right. So that's when it starts to get complicated. And for those pieces, at the very least, you need to start taking very accurate notes about every step of the process, and you can even go one step further and create sample bars that represent different steps of the process. So you have something that you can actually hold in your hands to compare to with the piece that you're working with. So at this point, I have all the rings made and I have all the seams lining up pretty much in the center. It's not in the center if you're a machinist, but as far as a blacksmith goes, you can see a definite consistency in all of the rings. So the last thing that I need to do is to forge the actual ring that I'm going to use to store all of these clamps. And as you can see, it's just basically a towel rack. And I decided to use this design because it'll make it easy to hang everything up on a wall close to the forge where I need them. I'm making the ring from a 12-inch piece of quarter-inch round bar, and I'm just going to start by forging the small loop at the top that I'm going to use to hang it up. Next, I just need to draw out the end a little bit and curve the rest of the bar into a large loop. And again, I'm using the horn exactly the same way to bend this bar. I'm supporting the bar where I don't want it to bend, and I'm hammering over the edge of the horn to force that part of the bar to move into another position. Here you can see one of the rings that I just made in place on a pair of tongs. The clamp is designed to apply all the pressure needed to keep a tight grip on the bar that you're working with. So as long as I have the clamp in place, I can treat this whole unit as though it was a solid piece of steel. So that makes holding the work a lot easier, not just because I don't have to have a tight grip on the tongs all the time, but I can also change my position on the tongs. If I'm working with a heavy bar and I can slide my hand up the tongs and use the weight of the tongs to counterbalance the weight of the bar, that makes holding that bar a lot easier. Also, if you need to move the bar around a lot, having the tongs clamped in position makes it a lot easier to do that. So that's the system that I'm using now. I've tried a lot of different things, and I've pretty much found that for the way that I work, there isn't anything better than a dedicated set of rings that fit their tongs in, every situation that you can imagine.